sermon part for the Racket Lake community. We had our Christmas Eve service, which it's a summer chapel. And on Christmas Eve is a challenge because the driveway has to be plowed. The heat has to be turned on at least 24 hours in advance. I remember going down during the COVID year. We did not have a service just because there were so many people that would be so close together. And we went down, and I remember recording a service in the chapel, which I was able to distribute. And if you looked real closely at the video, you could see I looked like Rudolph with a red nose because inside the temperature was 30. Again, thank you. Thank you for having us here. I have actually, this sermon's a little different, and it actually has two introductions, if you can believe that. I wanted to explain a couple of things. The gospel readings today in the last couple of weeks come from the Revised Common Lectionary. And if you're not familiar with that, that is a series of scriptural readings that go throughout the year. Technically, it's on a 3-year cycle, but many what we would call mainline denominations follow these readings. So the reading today, for instance, the gospel reading that Rich read for us, actually would be read at the Roman Catholic churches. It would be Presbyterians, Lutherans, Methodists, Congregationalists, Anglicans, Episcopalians, and Baptists. Some Baptists also follow that. To me, I like using it because it gives us that sense that the church is one. So we can sit here and think that 1 billion people today read that gospel. The second point, again, is this is an unusual sermon in that it's 2 parts. Because as I was going through the past week, putting something together, I found myself going in 2 directions. And my attempt this morning will be to bring those 2 paths together, and hopefully I'll be successful in doing that. Every Christmas, we gather together and we listen to a story that we think we know very well. We sing familiar hymns, we hear familiar readings, we retell the account of the child that's born in Bethlehem. Luke gives us angels and shepherds, and Matthew gives us dreams and wise men from the east. And then, almost unexpectedly, we arrive on the first Sunday after Christmas, and the lectionary gives us the opening of the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word. Now, the translation I'll be using is a little bit different than the New Life translation that you have. That's just fine. It's okay. The verses that we hear are poetic. They're profound. They're very special. They hold a great place in the formation of the Christian church. And maybe they're often the most misunderstood verses. Too often, we assume that John is asking us to attend a lecture on Christian doctrine, to parse arcane theological points, and to solve maybe some metaphysical puzzles along the way. But that's not why we read this at Christmas. John is not explaining Christmas, he's actually singing it. Many religious scholars believe that these verses 1 through 18 contain an ancient hymn or a poem. And it's carefully structured. It consists of praise and belief and wonder about God, but it's not a systematic theological textbook. It's worship, and it's it's worship set to words. And like all good hymns, it tells us not only what Christians believe, but why those beliefs matter. So, at this point, I'd like to read to you that hymn, and you'll know a couple of verses that are left out. Feel free to follow along in your translation. The verses that are left out are 6, 7, 8, and 15. We believe that, or scholars, I just listen to the scholars. Scholars believe that the author of John added these verses for a certain reason. So, let's read the hymn, just the hymn part. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overtake it. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who were born not of blood or of the will of the flesh or of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and lived among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. From his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. The law indeed was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. It is only the Son, himself, God, who is close to the Father's heart, who has made him known. This hymn reveals 4 themes. First one is the Word, or Logos. John begins not in Bethlehem, but in the beginning. With these words, he reaches back beyond Christmas, beyond history itself, and even beyond creation. And the word, or Logos, has some profound meaning. For John's original hearers, the Jewish people, this was a very daring statement. Logos was a word loaded with meaning. In Jewish thought, God's word was active, creative, and powerful. God spoke, and the world came into being. In Greek thought, Logos was the backdrop for reality. It gave life order. And John does something that may be startling. He says that this eternal word is not an idea, but a person. It's not a force. It's not a principle. And not only that, this word is in relationship. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. Christmas then does not begin with a baby. It begins with God, who has always been relational, expressive, and oriented towards self-giving. Before there is flesh, before there is a manger, there is a God who speaks, reaches out, and creates. Creation and light. The hymn moves quickly from eternity to creation. All things came into being through him. John wants us to know that Christmas is not just some side story. It is fulfillment. The Word is described as life, and the life becomes light. Light is one of John's greatest symbols. Light reveals. Light guides. Light allows us to see reality as it truly is. And importantly, John tells us that this light shines in the darkness. Notice, John doesn't say the darkness disappears. He doesn't say that the darkness never existed. He says that the light shines within it, and the darkness does not overcome it. At Christmas, the world does not suddenly become peaceful, safe, orderly. Herod still rules. Empires still oppress. Fear still governs human decisions, and yet John insists that light has entered this world. This isn't some sentimental thought. It is a resilient hope. And now the incarnation. The line comes into this hymn, which is in at the center of the hymn, and it holds everything else together. And the Word became flesh and lived among us. This is the heart of Christmas. Not that God sent help, and not that God sent us directions or instructions, but God came into this world. The Word does not hover over our reality. The Word did not come and just visit us briefly. The Word became flesh. Real, fragile, vulnerable flesh. The kind of flesh that gets tired and angry and misunderstood and wounded. John uses this striking phrase, lived among us. Literally, that means that God pitched his tent here. He lives with us, not far away, but close by, in proximity to us. And this is where the theology becomes a guide. Christmas tells us that God does not save the world by avoiding it. God saves the world by entering into it fully. And now grace and truth. The hymn closes by naming what this incarnate presence brings, grace and truth. Not one without the other, not a burdensome truth, a truth that crushes us, nor a grace that ignores reality, but a fullness, abundance upon abundance. John contrasts this with the law that was brought to us by Moses. Doesn't diminish that, but he says that in Jesus, God's self-giving love becomes visible and personal. Grace and truth are no longer ideas to be debated by us. They are embodied in our lives to be lived. And with that, this hymn ends. Not with an explanation, but with testimony. No one has ever seen God. It is God, the only Son, who has made him known. So Christmas, according to John, is revelation. And now, sermon part 2. There is no intermission. I'm sorry. People are still in the midst of a holiday. They're celebrating. They've been celebrating the birth of Christ, and people don't want to listen to some long, boring theological sermon or a lecture on the 5 points of Christianity. So I call this part of the sermon the day after Christmas. Because that's where the real questions begin. What happens after the candles are extinguished? What happens after we've sung all the carols? What happens when Christmas morning just becomes another ordinary morning? John's gospel doesn't confine Christmas to a single day. It insists that this incarnation has consequences for us. Presence over distance. If the Word became flesh and lived among us, then God has permanently chosen presence rather than distance from us. And this matters deeply for the church. Now, a quick footnote I have read from one scholar that Christianity is the only religion where God joined the people. God, in some religions, God calls people upward and away. Not so with our God. Our God came to live among us. And it means we can't claim to worship an incarnate God while we remain detached from this world, while we ignore the suffering of our neighbors. We can't celebrate God's closeness with us while practicing indifference. Incarnation calls the church to show up, to listen, to accompany people, to remain present in this world even when problems seem too great to overcome. The day after Christmas asks us, where is God calling us to be physically and relationally present? Light in darkness. John is honest about darkness. He doesn't deny it or spiritualize it away, and neither should we. The day after Christmas is when bills arrive, grief may resurface, conflicts resume, headlines remind us how fragile the world remains. John's claim is not that Christmas erases the darkness, but that the light has entered into it and continues to shine. For the church, this means faith is not pretending that everything is just fine. Faith is trusting that the light remains, even when the darkness feels deep and strong. The church becomes a bearer of this light, not through grand gestures or big, huge projects, but through small and faithful acts. Truth-telling, reconciliation, generosity, courage, empathy, compassion. And the incarnation still matters. The incarnation confirms that human bodies matter, relationships matter, and daily life matters. God doesn't save souls by ignoring flesh. God redeems flesh by inhabiting it. And the day after Christmas invites the church to care deeply about the realities of embodiment, like health and hunger and housing and dignity and labor and rest. Christmas doesn't float above the world. It commits us to it. And when the Word becomes flesh, human life becomes sacred ground. Grace and truth lived out. Grace and truth are not seasonal sentiments that we see during this season. They are practices of our faith. Grace looks like forgiveness that refuses to harden into resentment, and truth looks like honesty that refuses denial. And together, grace and truth shape communities that are open, resilient, and humble. The day after Christmas asks whether we're willing to live what we sang in those hymns. So, to conclude, at Christmas time, John's Gospel invites us to believe not an abstract doctrine, but a living truth. God chooses presence over distance, light over darkness. And God calls us as a church and as a people to embody that incarnate love in our lives and in our world. The hymns have been sung. The child has been born. And now comes the holy hard work, living as if the Word truly became flesh and still dwells among us. Amen.
Amen.